cake friends, it's Colleen with Pretty Sugar Cake Design. Today I'm going to make another video tutorial on how to frost a cake upside down for sharp edges. I've made one once before where we used Swiss meringue buttercream, but today I'm going to do it upside down using chocolate ganache. Now it's not a traditional chocolate ganache. This recipe calls for semi-sweet chocolate chips and salted butter. It's a little bit easier to have on hand, and it's not quite as finicky as traditional chocolate ganache with the heavy cream. At least that's what I have found. Also, this recipe has a little bit of carob syrup in it. So the first thing that you're going to need is 16 ounces of the semi-sweet chocolate chips. You're going to need 8 ounces of salted butter because the chocolate is really good with the salt in it. Also 2 tablespoons of the carob syrup. That will give it kind of a shine. You're also going to need an icing tip. It's a really large icing tip to put that on with. And if you've seen the other video where we do it with Swiss meringue buttercream, we use that in that video also. We're also going to be using our scraper again, one that I just bought at a hardware store. It's only been used for cake. You're also going to need a serrated knife just to trim down the sides of your cake so that you have enough thickness of the chocolate ganache on the sides. You're also going to need a cake board to go on the bottom of it. And I'll just take off that little label right there. Okay, let's get started. I've got 2 cakes here that have been in the freezer. I'm going to take off the parchment paper that I had in there. The side that has the parchment paper on the top is the cut side for now that I trimmed off the top. But this side of the parchment paper was where the cake was in the pan, so it's very, very flat. Also this side is because I used the top of the cake pan to level it off. So really you could go either way, but I'm going to use this side of the cake that was in the pan. I'm going to take I'm going to set this aside for a minute, and the cake board. I'm going to get me a rag in case I need that. Never know when you're going to need a wet rag or a dry rag, so. Okay, you're going to melt this chocolate down, the chocolate chips, the butter, and the carob syrup in a microwavable 4-cup measuring cup. You're going to do it at 30-second intervals and stirring between each time until your chocolate ganache is smooth and creamy and glossy. Then you're going to let it sit on the counter for a couple of hours, stirring every now and then until the consistency looks a little bit like the Swiss meringue buttercream. Okay, this sat on the counter for a couple hours after I made it, so that's about the consistency that you want. You don't want it too runny, or when you put it in your piping bag, it is going to just run out. So if it's about this thickness, then when you put it in your piping bag, it should stay in there. So that's what we're going to do right now. It's still our large piping bag that has our icing tip on it. You can take a large glass and set it down inside there to fill, so you can use both your hands. I don't normally do this with the Swiss meringue, but I think I'm going to do it with the chocolate this time. Now my cake has been in the freezer because I like to work with a really cold cake. That will also be setting the chocolate up, the ganache up, fairly quickly when you're working with it. I will use a little bit of this chocolate to put on my cake board in a minute, so I can glue my cake board to my cake. You're also going to need some parchment paper, just like in the video I made before with the Swiss meringue buttercream. You do need a piece of parchment paper. You need a turntable. I put a little non-skid piece of fabric on there so my plastic board will not move around. Put that on top. I put my parchment paper on top of that, and I just check with my fingers to make sure that that is centered because we don't want it falling off. Okay, so we're going to gather this up and get ready to start assembling the cake upside down. Now this tip has a serrated edge on one side, and so I'm going to have that facing up, and the flat side of the tip along here I'm going to put against my board, and I'm going to draw pieces of the chocolate ganache out. This is just like in the other video tutorial where I'm using the Swiss meringue. I'm just guessing about the size I'm going to need to cover that cake on the top. Okay, this is a 6-inch round chocolate cake. Again, this is the side right here that was in the pan. I'm going to place that face down on the ganache. some ganache in the middle also. Pull this over to make sure it's still centered in my board. I'm going to get my next cake. This is the cut side of the cake. This side was the side that was in the pan. That's going to be face up. I'm going to set my cake down on top of the filling. Make sure it's centered. Now the chocolate ganache will set up because the cakes are really cold, so we shouldn't have a problem with the filling squeezing out through the sides. I like to use a level to make sure that the cakes I'm working with are going to be level and square. So I just set that on the top. Check for that. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Okay, we'll just set that aside. Now I'm going to use my scraper, just like in my other video tutorial, and we're going to just clean up the sides of this chocolate by putting the scraper underneath and just pulling up the chocolate. Okay, you're also going to need an offset spatula. I like to use the small one. I'm going to just borrow a little bit of that ganache from there. And I'm going to put it on the white side of my cake board, because this is the part people will see when they cut the cake. Put a little bit on there so we can attach that to the top for now, but this is actually going to be the bottom because we're going to turn it upside down. I just check to see if I have enough overhang on all sides. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to check the level one more time. Okay, that is level. I'm going to scrape off the rest of this chocolate and just use it for now, spreading that on the cake so I can start out with a clean scraper. And also just go around here smoothing this out a bit. I can feel the chocolate is starting to set, so we want to work fairly quickly. Okay, with the chocolate that we have left in the piping bag, we're going to put the serrated edge next to the cake because we don't want to see those bumps on the cake. We want the smooth side to face towards us. And lay it on the cake board and squeeze your bag and just start turning your pedestal. Fill it in on the next row. Now this is going to be really close, and if we don't fill in the whole top row, that's going to be okay because we're going to be able to scrape off some from below and redistribute it where we need to have it. Just trying to get every bit of that out onto my cake. Looks like it's not going to go quite around that top layer, but that's alright. Like I said, we'll just smooth it just a little bit, redistribute that with our offset spatula, pull some of that up, put it right close to the cake board that's on the top, which, like I said, is really going to be the bottom. Okay, I've pushed that chocolate right up against the cake board so that I can get ready to scrape it in just a second. The consistency is still quite nice to work with. It hasn't hardened where I can't work with it. I'll move this over here so we can scrape our utensils off if we need to. Okay, so with my offset spatula, well, not offset spatula, with my scraper that I got from the hardware store, I'm going to set it down on the edge of this cake board, leaning the top next to this cake board up here, and try to keep your wrist level and following the cake board that's on the top for now. Just scraping off the excess chocolate. Now when the cake is kind of small, like the 6-inch cake, it does want to move around a little bit, so you don't want to push too hard while you're scraping. Even though the cake board has a non-skid piece underneath the bottom, it's the top piece that wants to move a little bit just because it's a small cake. If I push on it too hard. Now I can feel while I'm going around there that there are some places that need to be filled in a little bit with my spatula. So I'm just going to take a little excess and put some more on there. There's some little spots right there. Another one right there. But I'm excited about doing this with chocolate. I love doing it with Swiss meringue buttercream, and it just makes a perfectly level cake, perfectly square on the sides, perfectly beautiful, and a little bit less time consuming than some of the other methods that I have seen. And I really do like using this chocolate ganache, I'm calling it, but it's not a traditional heavy cream ganache. Like I said, we've made this with the salted butter. But it's really, really a great tasting chocolate on a cake. And once this gets all finished, I'm going to put it into the refrigerator and let it set up a little bit more. Once I do that, I'll be able to just decorate it as it is if I just want a chocolate ganache that is the final finish, or I would be able to put some fondant over it at that point. You want to lean sideways and look down when you think you're done, and look at the sides. Make sure the sides are very level and straight. I will do that in just a minute. I can feel it sliding, so I'm going to pull it back with this parchment paper. And I'll lean over and check the sides. It looks like it's flaring out just a little bit, so I'm going to scrape around it some more, just putting a little bit of pressure on the bottom portion, just to make that more level. I'm still following the cake board on the top, but I'm just going to put a little bit more pressure and take off some more chocolate off the bottom edge. This is just a little bit easier with the bigger cake because it does not want to slide around as much as this small one. You see how straight the sides of the cake are becoming. I'm going to bend over and look at that. The sides are still slightly just coming out just a little bit, so the ganache is still very workable. I can still go around it some more, putting a little pressure more on the bottom edge, just skimming off a little bit more of that chocolate. Putting some pieces of tape across this parchment paper and onto this board may make that so it won't want to slide as much. Since this is the first time I've ever done this with the chocolate, I just thought of that and think that may help, since I have to push on this slightly more as it sets up compared to the Swiss meringue when I'm using that. Maybe I'll quickly grab some tape and do that really quick. But then again, maybe I won't, because I'm actually out of some tape. So we're just going to keep leaning over and checking that a little bit. Putting a little bit more pressure on the bottom. Okay, that looks really nice and level. And I'm going to go put this in the refrigerator for now. And as soon as that sets up in about 15-20 minutes, I'll bring it back out. We'll turn it right side up, and we will then take the parchment paper off. And we'll show you in about 15-20 minutes what that looks like. Okay, hi, I'm back. I've had the cake chilling for just 5 to 10 minutes actually. We didn't need to go 15 or 20. And the sides have set really nice, and we're going to turn the cake right side up at this point. I'm just going to put, well, I'm going to lift it up so you can see. It's still on that plastic cake board. I've got one hand on the bottom. I'm going to put one hand on the cardboard, which is the bottom when I flip it. Quickly flip it. Take off the plastic top. I'm going to actually put that back on here and set the cake down. And lift off the parchment paper. Okay, that looks really great, except for a couple little spaces that didn't fill in with the chocolate. And it's the same way we do with the Swiss meringue. We have to fix the top with the Swiss meringue, and we're going to have to do it with the chocolate also. But do you see how straight the sides are? It's looking really good. So I did actually put my chocolate ganache back in the microwave for just a minute because it was hardening up a little bit. And just for, 6 seconds was all I needed to put that in. And I'm going to fill in that right there. Let me give you a closer look. I'm going to fill in those little spots. We'll put this up here closer. Okay, with my softened ganache and my offset spatula, just pressing that down on there and filling in. I've worked with traditional chocolate ganache before, and I prefer using this recipe, which is actually my chocolate glaze recipe, and I have a video on how to pour chocolate glaze over a cake, and this is just really that same recipe that I just let stiffen up a little bit more so I can actually put it in the piping bag and pipe it onto my cake so I can do the upside down method. Same recipe as that poured chocolate glaze. But I actually really like the flavor of this one, like I said before, because of the salt in the butter. So we have like a salted chocolate ganache. I like to use tissues just to clean off my spatula really, really well, smoothing that just a little bit better on the top. And now I've pushed out a little bit around the top edge, and I will clean that up. Alright, I'm back to finish off the cake. I had a few video difficulties, so I'm going to just have to talk through what I finished on the end of the cake as I was smoothing it. I had a little bit of ganache hanging over the edges while I was smoothing the top and smoothing this piece that had a little bit of imperfections on it. I just took my offset spatula with the pieces that were hanging over and smoothed it with the edge of that offset spatula. Then I took it from the top and pulled those pieces in, smoothing it. Maybe have to go one more time, just carefully. And then pulling this in and smoothing that. So there you have it. There's the ganache covered cake. That's my my idea of ganache, the one that uses semi-sweet chocolate chips and salted butter and corn syrup. Although in the beginning I said that the corn syrup helps give it a gloss, but it actually, once you start working with the chocolate, is not showing a glossy finish. This is the first time that I've ever done this recipe, and I know the glossy finish is when I pour that chocolate glaze and then never work with it again. When I pour a melted chocolate glaze over a cake, the corn syrup helps it stay looking really dark and glossy. But if we're doing the upside down method with this cake and using a scraper and keep touching the chocolate and working with it, you actually don't end up with a glossy cake. But I think I would still put the corn syrup in the recipe. I'm really happy with the way this looks. It's very level and even. Give you a little close up. The edges look really great. Now at this point I have not had to refrigerate this cake. It is very sealed with the chocolate that's on there. I can pick it up. I can put it on a pedestal without getting chocolate on my hands because the chocolate is set. So if you want to leave it like that, that's perfectly fine. You can do some fun things with that. You could put some fondant polka dots on there. You could cover the whole thing with fondant and still have these really great edges. And because the cake is not cold, like the one when I make Swiss meringue where I have to work with a cold cake, and sometimes I get little air bubbles that I can pop. But maybe with this one you won't get as many air bubbles because the cake doesn't have to remain cold when I'm putting the fondant on. So have fun working with that. Also wanted to mention that this does not work with white chocolate chips and butter. That is not a recipe that will work. This only works with the semi-sweet chocolate chips and the butter. If you want a white chocolate recipe, you'll have to go back to the traditional white chocolate ganache recipe that calls for heavy cream. And I'm going to have to try that someday because sometimes dark chocolate just doesn't work out for what you want. But enjoy that. I will try and put the recipe for the chocolate ganache, my version, in the comments below. And if you have any questions after watching this, feel free to post them and I'll answer them as soon as I can. Also, I thought maybe it would be fun to cut this cake open and let's see what it looks like before I end this video. So let's go ahead and do that. I've got my favorite knife, and let's see how it slices. I'm going to need my tissue paper so I can work with a clean knife. Okay, I'm getting a few cracks in it, but I think that's okay. If you had this covered with fondant, you wouldn't be seeing that probably. Okay, there's the finished cake. It has the chocolate and the ganache on the inside of the cake. Some has broken off, but that's okay. You can put those little pieces back on to serve with your cake. It looks delicious. You guys enjoy. Thanks for watching this video.